Isn't it ironic the most obstructed president in the history of the country is on the verge of making the world a whole lot safer?
A whole lot safer? That's not what everybody, of course, is saying today. Hello, welcome back. John Bachman in for J.D. Hayworth alongside Vera Gibbons here. That was Ed Schultz of MSNBC defending President Obama, saying that this Iranian nuclear deal has made the world, Vera, a much safer place. Time will tell. Of course, this framework for the Iranian nuclear deal has been announced. A lot of concern coming from Israel and elsewhere in the world. Ambassador Eric Edelman is joining us now. He's a former ambassador from Turkey. Ambassador, it's good to have you with us.
John, good to be with you this morning.
It's a pleasure to talk to you as always, sir. We're going to try to look at this first. You've heard the reaction earlier from Israel. You would expect them to say this type of thing, that the world is a much more dangerous place now with Iran able to have to have a nuclear weapon, or they will have a nuclear weapon, as some say, within 10 years. Is this bluster from Israel, or is the concern legitimate, or how much of the concern is real?
Well, I think there are very legitimate grounds for concern. In the first instance, it's not clear that we really have a deal at all. There was a very vague joint statement issued by the EU and Iran yesterday afternoon, Ms. Mogherini and Minister Zarif, and that was followed by a State Department fact sheet that provided a lot of detail, frankly more detail than I think most of us expected, including some restrictions on the Iranian program that people might not have expected. However, within hours, Minister Zarif was tweeting that the fact sheet was spin, and other members of the team were pushing back against specific claims in the fact sheet about how this whole deal would work. So it's not even really clear that we have a deal. To the degree that we have a deal, it's a deal about continuing to negotiate until we actually have a final deal. So I think there was a lot of hype yesterday in the first instance. Secondly, there are some major question marks based on the fact sheet having to do with low-enriched uranium. What do the Iranians get to do with it? With research and development, how much will they be allowed? Sanctions relief, how quickly will it come? And verification, how intrusive will it be?
Larry, what's your take?
Ambassador, at the end of the day, this deal is all about trust. Why wasn't a statement from Iran part of the negotiation? The statement is that I recognize Israel as a Jewish state and Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. How come that wasn't at least part of the negotiations in order to give confidence to the Israelis that the Iranians are going to abide by this deal?
Well, I think the administration has, roped off this deal from other elements of Iran's behavior, including its threats against Israel, repeated within even the last few days. They've always tried to fence the negotiations on the nuclear deal off from these other elements. But even within the negotiations for the nuclear deal, they've dumbed down the criteria that they've been using to judge the deal. They initially said they wanted to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapons capability. Now they're saying they want to keep them from being able to have a nuclear weapon within 12 months. That's a very different standard.
Well, Alan Dershowitz was just on Midpoint yesterday, and here's what he had to say about the nuclear deal.
At one point he said the deal will prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons for at least 10 years, and then he said, quote, they will never be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. Well, which is it? Is this a green light in 10 years, or is it a red light for 15 or 20 years? We don't know.
Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think what Alan Dershowitz is pointing out is that there are a number of contradictions in the administration's approach to this issue. He's pointed out to that one. There are some others as well having to do with how quickly Iran, if the negotiations fail, would move to develop a nuclear weapon. The degree to which there are alternatives to this deal. I mean, the administration likes to portray it as this deal or war. Obviously, there are other alternatives.
All right, Ambassador, we do want to also get your take on this as we look at broaden things out a little bit. You're obviously an expert on Turkey, having served as the ambassador there. In other parts of the Muslim world, in Turkey, how are they viewing this agreement?
Well, I think in the region as a whole, there's a lot of anxiety about this agreement. The Turks may or may not share that, but certainly the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, others of our Sunni Muslim allies, Egypt, Jordan, are very nervous about this agreement, as is Israel. Turkey has had a slightly more ambiguous view of this over the years, but I think they will mostly at this point be watching and waiting and waiting to see the final deal before they really opine on it.
Well, early on, there had been some initial discussion between President Erdogan and President Obama, maybe getting closer there on the onset. Not apparently the case right now, but they are a very important player in all this, and we'll get into more of that coming up in just a few moments. We'll be rejoined by former Turkish Ambassador Eric Edelman coming to us from Virginia. John Bachman, Vera Gibbons, we'll be back with you right after this. And we welcome you back to America's Forum. John Bachman alongside Vera Gibbons. And we're rejoined now by former Turkish Ambassador Eric Edelman. And Ambassador, yesterday I was talking to Zuhdi Jasser, and we were talking about the broader kind of Arab and Persian conflict going on here. Of course, a lot of this has to do with the historical relationship between these different groups. Where does the former Ottoman Turkish part of this come into play?
Well, you do have sort of civilizational fault lines, as Sam Huntington might have said here, and there definitely is a Sunni Arab Persian dimension to what's going on. There's also a Turkish dimension to it as well, and it's one reason why, although the Turks have been relatively sanguine up until this point about Iran's nuclear developments, I think in the longer run, as Iran moves closer to a nuclear weapon, it will be very troublesome to Turkey. And Turkey, like other countries in the region, is hedging its bets by pursuing civilian nuclear energy, which would at some point give it the basis for getting out of the NPT if they ever decided to do so, if you start to get a nuclear arms race in the region.
Worst case scenario.
Ambassador, under the watchful eye of the IAEA, North Korea became a nuclear power, India became a nuclear power, Pakistan became a nuclear power. Are we to believe that the Iranians are less clever than the North Koreans, the Indians, and the Pakistanis?
Well, the Indians and Pakistanis were in a slightly different situation because they were never signatories to the NPT. But North Korea is a very instructive example, and there's absolutely no reason to believe that we are not going to have very severe problems with the Iranians, who have been serial prevaricators about their nuclear activities and have only fessed up after being caught.
Was there some difference there, though, Ambassador, where in Iran you actually have an economy, in North Korea you don't really have that? It's not exactly a free market economy, but the sanctions, a lot of folks say, did bring Iran to the negotiating table. Is that a difference between Iran and North Korea?
Sanctions brought North Korea to the negotiating table, too. We had extremely tough banking sanctions on North Korea, which helped prompt the North Koreans to come to the table in the six-party talks in 2006, 2007. What's instructive here is after, at the behest of the negotiator at the time, Ambassador Chris Hill, having taken those sanctions off North Korea, that was when the negotiations actually fell apart and failed.
Ambassador, a few days ago, James Clapper, the National Intelligence Director, was on the Charlie Rose PBS show, and he said that Iran already has the capability, the technological know-how to build a bomb right now. It's just that the Ayatollah has not given the green light to it. If that's the case, what are we talking about when Kerry and Obama are saying that this is going to stop Iran from ever getting a bomb, when the National Intelligence Director says they already have the ability to make one now?
Well, I think that's one of the major flaws in this agreement. What it really does is, through a series of concessions by the U.S., provide an international ratification for Iran essentially becoming a nuclear threshold state. It might delay the point at which they could actually develop a nuclear weapon, but it allows them to maintain the infrastructure and actually engage in research and development to perfect their ability to break out later if they decide to do so.
You know, of course, again, Ambassador, we're talking about another deadline. We had a blown deadline just this week. Is there anything that you're looking for specifically to indicate to you that this deadline is going to be different than all the ones we've seen in the past?
You know, I think the way that the deadlines have been played by the Iranians, you have to admire them as negotiators. They have used these deadlines very effectively for their own purposes, to squeeze more and more concessions out of the U.S. because they know that the Obama administration is desperate for a legacy-enhancing nuclear deal at almost any cost, and therefore they can, by playing the deadlines against us, get the U.S. to make more concessions. Just look at the pattern of concessions in the last week before the announcement yesterday.
Larry, you want to wrap up real quick? We got about 20 seconds to go.
Yeah, Ambassador, real quickly, the Iranian journalist who defected said that John Kerry is doing Iran's bidding and trying to get the other partners to go along with Iran as opposed to trying to get Iran to stop its nuke. What was the reaction when the Iranian journalist defected like that and said those things?
In 10 seconds, Ambassador, if you can.
Well, I think most people who read it already knew that, but I haven't seen any reaction officially from the State Department.
All right, a lot more to talk about, too. We'd like to get you back very soon, Ambassador, because things are certainly heating up in Turkey in terms of violence as well. And Larry Elder will stick around with us for another block. We got Todd Curvis coming up. We're going to talk about the second black box that was found in this Germanwings crash right after this.